The following story was written as part of a fully online writing class designed and taught by author Meagan J. Meehan. The stories from this class were subsequently printed in an anthology series titled Wicked Writing Volume 1, courtesy of Stitched Smile Publications. To join the next class, email Meagan J. Meehan directly at artsyY@gmail.com. To purchase a copy of the book, visit its Amazon page, linked in the description below. And to learn more about Stitched Smile Publications, visit their official website at www.stitchedsmilepublications.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Meagan and her authors, and enjoy the story. Parker was loading his shotgun when someone knocked. He froze. Up until now, he had taken his near absolute solitude on the island for granted. The sensible people had long since fled, and now it was the others, or, well, one in particular, that worried him. The knock came again, louder. He stared across the darkened living room from the couch. Could they not see that the door was boarded up? "Who's there?" he called out, to no reply. "If you're the killer," he thought, "I'm not your type." He set the 12-gauge down on the table beside the open box of ammunition. He traded it for a snub-nosed revolver and slid the gun into his pocket as he stood. Light came from a muted television. On the screen, a meteorologist gestured at a massive hurricane in the Atlantic. "The death toll in Haiti continues to rise," captions read. Parker was nearly at the door when the wood creaked outside. He halted and pictured the killer lurking on his deck. He imagined him being a balding, middle-aged white man with soulless eyes and a dirty cargo shirt. Parker had no way of knowing what the killer actually looked like, of course. The image sprang to mind when he first heard about the drowned girls, before the hurricane and the subsequent evacuation took over the news. Another footstep creaked around the back of the house, and he turned to face it. A shaft of late afternoon light came through a sliding glass door past the TV. Parker had left a small gap in the storm shutters there so that he could come and go as he prepared for the hurricane. Outside, wind rustled the palm trees, and the fronds cast long shadows across his second-story deck. He crept toward the light, resting his right hand on the revolver in his jeans. He was about to call out again when a fist pounded on the glass. He nearly drew his gun on reflex, but heard a familiar voice shouting from outside.
"Hey, Parker,"
the woman's voice called.
"I know you're in there. You're the only one besides me dumb enough to still be here."
It was Irene. Parker relaxed and sighed, then slid the door open and stepped out into the warm October air. Irene was wearing a tank top that revealed her tattoos, 2 full sleeves devoted to her nautical passions. On one arm, the tendrils of a kraken crept down amongst a kingdom of merfolk. On the other, beautiful sirens beckoned from their rocks at an approaching galleon. A compass rose was inscribed in black ink on her right wrist. She smiled and ran her hand through her choppy hair. "Reen, what the hell are you doing here?" Parker demanded. "Well, hello to you too," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Sorry, I thought you were buttoned up at the boathouse." "Yeah, about that. Haven't you been watching the news?" "I've been busy." Parker thought of his checklist. He'd secured every door and window with steel shutters. The lawn tools and kayaks were tied up under the house. He had enough food and water stockpiled for 2 weeks, boxes of batteries for the flashlights, lanterns, and radio, more than enough Jack Daniels to stay drunk for the entire experience if need be, and plenty of ammo for... Did you hear me, Parker? They've upgraded the storm to Category 4. It's not slowing down. You're leaving? I can't risk it. Not with my dog. I'm taking the skiff mainland while there's still time. Parker knew what was coming next. You should come too. John says you can stay at his place while it blows over. The thought of spending the next few days on her boyfriend's sofa was not exactly appealing. Regardless, Parker knew he wasn't going anywhere, and so did she. The wounded look in her eyes was out of genuine concern for him, he knew. She winced. He was certain she'd spotted the shotgun and sprawled shells on the table inside. Nice arsenal, by the way, she said. It's not safe out there. Speaking of which, why are you walking around alone? You could have just called me. Her accusing stare turned softer. Look, Parker, I'm worried about you. I know this isn't an easy time for you, but Charles Rowe is dead. The name brought the image of the soulless-eyed killer back, as a memory, this time, from a newspaper in his childhood. When his father saw the picture, he threw the entire paper into the fireplace, and then sat alone with his gin, weeping. This isn't about him. The tourists they found last week, the girl... People drown all the time, Parker, you know that. Not with their hands tied. Not like that. And some people get into bad shit. I've lived here my whole life and I can handle myself. Right now, the real threat is the storm, and I'm getting out of here while I still can. When it was clear there was no convincing him otherwise, Irene turned to leave. I can at least walk you back to the boathouse, Parker said, as he followed her around the deck and down the stairs. Hannibal, her German shepherd, was waiting for her below. She undid his leash from the bottom stair. He wagged his tail at the sight of Parker. Thanks, but I already have a bodyguard, she said. Take care of yourself, okay? With that, Irene and Hannibal left. Parker watched her walk down the empty street between the ocean and the row of silent, armored houses. When she was finally out of view, he went back inside, sealed the last 2 storm shutters behind him, and settled in for the ride with a glass of whiskey. He watched the silently spinning storm on the television as he sipped his drink, and eventually his eyes became heavy, and he found himself nodding off. He dreamt of familiar memories. His father drove him through the aftermath of Hurricane Lysandra. Fallen palm trees littered the pavement. His dad had to swerve the car to avoid them. They were going too fast. The roads were empty. They'd gone so fast they made it to the island before the government closed the bridges behind them. Parker was only 10, but he knew from his dad's intense silence that he was afraid. Lysandra was much more powerful than predicted. His mom and his little sister, Nicole, had stayed behind while his dad picked Parker up from his grandparents on the mainland. It was dusk by the time they arrived at the house. There was just enough light to see the front door, hanging open. It was dark inside. "Wait here," his dad told him as he parked the car, and then ran inside. Parker sat in his seat, staring at the plants strewn across the yard. He hoped their banana tree in the backyard was okay. Suddenly, his father screamed. Parker's blood turned ice cold. His dad had never so much as shouted before, but that scream came from depths of anguish Parker could not yet understand. Soon his dad was running back to the car. Tears stained his reddened face. He wouldn't say what he saw. He just peeled the car out of the yard and drove until he found men in camouflage uniforms and brought them back to the house. Parker never saw his mother or Nicole again. The guardsmen found a third body in the house, and soon everybody knew his name. Charles Ashton Rowe. Parker would see his face on TV and newspaper headlines for years to come. "Serial drowner is local captain," one headline read. "So it wasn't a satanic cult after all," a news anchor had said, "but many questions remain. Among them, why did Charles Rowe drown himself in a bathtub with his final 2 victims?" Parker watched the paper his father tossed into the fireplace. Charles Rowe's face seemed to crinkle into a smile as the page burnt and the dream ended. Parker opened his eyes. Everything was black. Outside, the wind blustered and whistled. Sheets of rain beat against the side of the house. The power was out. He felt around and remembered he was lying on the couch. He stood clumsily and felt his way through the darkness to the kitchen counter. He found a lantern and switched it on, stinging his eyes with cold white light. Something splashed in the bathroom. Parker turned in surprise. The bathroom door was closed, its white paint seeming to glow softly in the pale light. Another splash. He'd filled the tub before shutting off water to the house. He pictured vibrations from the wind, rattling his shampoo bottles into the water. But the splashing continued. He thought of the times his father would catch some impressive fish and put it in the laundry tub for him and his sister to see. They'd come home from school to find some exotic creature splashing figure 8s in the tub. His memories were interrupted, though, by the practical concern of the house having sprung a leak. Parker grabbed a flashlight and opened the door. The flashlight fell out of his hands and illuminated the body. She knelt against the bathtub, head underwater. Her tattooed arms were bound across her back with rope. Panic flooded through Parker's veins. He dove to pull her out. "Irene! Oh my God!" He lifted Irene's ice-cold body out of the water. No sooner than he thought of how to resuscitate her, she was sitting up, on her own. He felt her dead weight vanish and pulled back in disbelief. She rose to her feet powerfully, the binding slipping effortlessly from her wrists. Her damp hair grew impossibly fast beneath her shoulders. Her tattoos ran like wet ink, staining her skin black. She turned to face him as he crawled backwards into the beam of the flashlight, her empty eyes dripping black streaks down her face. Parker tried to scream, but was breathless. She opened her mouth, as if to scream back, water gurgling forth onto her shirt, her features snarled into an expression of rage and her scream coming in the form of an ear-piercing mechanical siren. The sound of a civil hurricane horn echoed through the house, across the entire island. Parker woke with a gasp, sweat beading across his face. Fierce winds battered the house, whistling like 100 crying teapots as they pried every inch of its defenses. Parker lay frozen on the couch as he slowly accepted he'd been dreaming. When it felt safe to move, he sat up, feeling across the table for his phone. He felt a need to check on Irene. Squinting at the cell phone's lack of signal, he realized he'd slept through the beginning of the storm. Grabbing a flashlight, he hesitantly confirmed this time the bathroom was empty. Even after switching on all the lanterns, the house still felt eerily dark. Parker couldn't shake the image of Irene's wraith lurking in the shadows beyond the strange lamplight. He grabbed a bottle of water and switched on the radio. A 90s alternative station on the mainland was still coming through, and he cranked the volume up to drown out the banshee wail of the wind and rain outside. The music did little to mask the growing intensity of the storm. A sudden rush of wind brought with it the sound of snapping tree trunks. Everywhere metal groaned and buckled. Something massive cracked and came crashing down nearby, and the chaos repeated further away, like the footsteps of some immense creature stomping across the island. The shutters rattled and banged together as though a crowd of people were trying desperately to break in through every door and window. But the defenses held, and the worst of it eventually passed. Parker wondered if this is what it was like for his mom and Nicole, trapped in the path of Lysandra. He wondered, as he often did, how it would have been different if he and his dad had been there with them. He had once punched a boy that had been harassing Nicole at her bus stop. He would have punched Charles Road, too. If only he had been there. Every so often, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of debris smashing into the house. He wondered about the other women on the island who had gone missing, or turned up worse. One had vanished while jogging in the early morning hours, another while she was home alone, doing laundry. Parker couldn't fully explain the connection in his conversation with Irene, but there was something to it, some familiar cowardice. He wondered if they had family who would feel as messed up as he did, 20 years down the road. Would their fathers drink themselves into an early grave too? Eventually, the wind began to subside. The banshee wail was replaced with a distant, muffled roar. Parker was already feeling drowsy again as the radio suffered interference. Static and strange voices bled into the channel, becoming gradually worse until nothing was left of the song but a distorted screech. He winced and mashed the power button. Outside, the barrage of what must have been coconuts and chunks of gravel had quieted down to a constant tick-tick of sand against the storm shutters. Further off, he could still hear what must have been the snapping of branches that, in any other situation, he'd have taken for gunshots. Then came the footsteps, scraping across the gravel and stomping up the creaking stairs. Parker jumped to his feet. Someone pounded on the door.
Help me. Please help me.
The child's voice cried out. Nicole, Parker thought.
Please, he's gonna hurt me.
No, not Nicole, but another little girl. The pounding continued.
He hurt my mommy. He tried to grab me.
She sobbed. You'll be okay, he shouted, without a second thought. Stay right where you are. Parker ran to his shotgun and slung it over his shoulder. Then he pried off the support to the shutters outside his side door and kicked them out. He slipped outside into the calm night air. You're safe here, Parker called out. Come inside and you'll be okay. But there was only silence from around the corner. Parker took up his shotgun and switched on the light mounted to its barrel. The deck lit up before him, strewn with sand and tattered palm fronds. He made his way cautiously to the corner and then spun around it. The front doorway was empty. The stairway descended to an inky blackness. Come back! I can protect you! A hush had fallen over the island, save for the gentle rustling of the palm trees. As the eye wall passed, the world had become calm. Footsteps scuffed across the pavement in the street. Parker rushed down the stairs in pursuit. Wait! Don't run! He nearly tripped on his own collapsed fence, making it to the street. It was there he caught his first glimpse of the storm's wrath. Wreckage blanketed the asphalt. The remains of his neighbor's deck were scattered across the sandy pavement, draped in the wires of fallen power lines and uprooted trees. Parker spun around, his weapon light glinting off pieces of metal roof tiles, strewn along with countless other debris bound up in piles of seaweed. Further down, the road was blocked by a center console boat, overturned onto its smashed canopy. He saw no trace of the girl. He knew it was only a matter of time before the eye passed over and the winds returned. He didn't want to think about what it would be like if either of them were caught outside when that happened. A scream rang down the street. Parker turned to see light flickering from an open door further down. An orange glow danced inside, giving the second-story entrance the appearance of a jack-o'-lantern's eye floating in the dark. Parker knew the owners of that house left it empty most of the year, occasionally renting to vacationers. He tried to recall if he'd seen a family there with a young girl, but where else could she have come from? He crossed the field of waterlogged waste to the house and ran up the stairs. He shouldered the shotgun before stepping inside. The glow came from red, votive candles scattered throughout the house. Water dripped from leaks in the 2-story ceiling and puddled in the great room below. The candles were everywhere. Every table, every shelf, nook, and cranny glowed. To Parker, it looked like some sort of church ceremony, though the harsh beam from his gunlight ruined the effect. He resisted the urge to call out, instead slowly clearing the house. He found the woman's body in the bathroom. She was bound and kneeling face first in the bathtub. A wave of derealization washed over him. In that instant, he expected to wake up from another dream. "You're not real," he thought. He reached out and rolled the woman's icy body over in the water. Her lifeless eyes stared out between long, blonde bangs. He recognized her now, having seen her jog past his house before work. He didn't know she had a daughter. He didn't even know her name. "Don't worry about her," a man's voice said. In an instant, Parker was back on his feet, both hands on the gun. He pointed the beam back out the door. Something had blown out most of the votives. "You killed her, you son of a bitch!" Parker shouted. "She'll never die," the voice said from the living room. "She has a purpose now." Parker aimed towards the voice, but there was nothing there except smoking candles. "And she'll never leave the storm," the voice said from above him. "None of them will." The stairs off the living room creaked. Footsteps pounded on the second-floor balcony. "You're insane!" Parker shouted and charged up the stairs. "They're part of the Tempest now," the man said. "That's the way she needs it to be." A door slammed just as Parker reached the top of the stairs. He trained his gun at the door at the end of the balcony and froze for a moment, knowing he shouldn't pursue. The killer could be waiting on the other side with a knife or a gun of his own. Candlelight from below flickered between the balusters to his left. The rooms to his right were open and dark. He thought of the little girl, of Nicole, and where she could be hiding. "I won't let you hurt her," he told himself decisively, and attacked. The man lunged out of a side room and grabbed the shotgun. Parker pulled back, and the gun fired, spraying buckshot into the wall with a deafening blast. In an instant, the gun was flung over the rails and everything was dark again. The man grabbed Parker by the throat. Parker gasped. Suddenly, he was experiencing a vision. Dark clouds spun violently in the sea around the island. The eye wall roared with winds like volcanic rage. There were howls in the wind like screams, and he realized the wind itself was nothing but screams. Countless cries of anguish and fury that bled together in a singular, terrified wail. Parker could see shapes in the vortex of clouds that looked like people, and there were thousands of them. Their wispy faces contorted in agony as they roiled in and out of existence. Parker was pulled back into his body as the man tightened his grip, lifting him from his feet.
"That's why she lets us stay," the man declared, "to feed her souls."
He flung Parker into the end of the hall, knocking the wind out of him. Parker choked. His ears rang.
"You saw through her eye," the man said as he closed the distance. "The drowned damned carry her across the sea."
Parker looked up at the man in the faint light and recognized his face from a dozen photographs. "You," he coughed. The silhouette of Charles Rowe smiled at him.
"When she first whispered to me, I was nothing but a glorified fisherman. She's let us become so much more. You'll see."
Parker pulled the revolver from his pocket and fired. The muzzle flash was blinding. He shot again and again, the thunder crack of the .357 blasting in his eardrums. He didn't notice the tremendous recoil as he unloaded the entire cylinder. The gun clicked, empty. Charles Rowe slumped to his knees.
"I'll always be with her,"
he said in a raspy whisper, and grasped Parker's arm.
"She chose me."
Parker was once again taken by a vision. A fishing boat rode the gentle swell of the vast, sunlit ocean. 4 hooded captives lay on the rear casting deck, struggling with their restraints. Charles Rowe rose from below deck and prostrated himself before them. They tried to scream through their gags as he began to pray aloud. He whispered a prayer of offering to his goddess of the storm and promised to join her soon. He stood and shoved the weighted bait cooler off the back of the deck. A length of chain pulled each victim in turn, writhing into the sea. Parker thrashed as if it were him drowning and pulled his arm free of Charles Rowe's dying grasp. Parker bashed him in the skull with the steel frame of the revolver and he fell to his side. To Parker's eyes, still half blind, it looked as though his silhouette simply vanished into the shadowed floor. Parker dropped the gun and stood up, coughing. Gunpowder stung his bruised windpipe and filled his nostrils with an acrid smell. He rubbed his eyes and looked again for Rowe. There was nothing but empty carpet before him. He stumbled his way downstairs, struggling to breathe. His own footsteps were muffled to his sore eardrums. He'd become lightheaded. He needed fresh air. By the time he reached the front door, he heard the dull roar of wind in the distance. He leaned on the balustrade and caught his breath. Out in the street, a little girl darted out from behind an overturned boat. She ran away and vanished into the darkness. Parker tried to call out to her, and then spotted the man lurking there. He looked like something of a different age. Garlands of seaweed draped his shoulders of his brocade coat, and the brim of his tricorn hat concealed his face. Parker stared in disbelief as the shadow of another man stepped out of the rocky shore across the street. Muck dripped from Charles Rowe's body as he sloshed out of the water. All along the coast, others were rising from the ocean. That's why she lets us stay. Parker turned away and saw an antique diving suit staring up at him from the base of the stairs. Its brass helmet was full of dark water. It lifted one of its massive boots onto the first step. Parker dashed inside, slamming and bolting the door. He backed away and heard another thudding step, so he picked his shotgun off the ground and racked the action. The spent shell rattled onto the floor. As he aimed the gun at the door, the derealization returned. "It's not real," he told himself, still waiting for the drowned diver to bring his boot crashing down again. But suddenly, a soothing voice whispered in his ear. He didn't recognize the language she spoke, but the effect was immediately calming. He lowered his weapon as the realization washed over his body like the caress of a gentle breeze. He closed his eyes, and once again he saw the view from the center of the eye. The tormented soul still spun around him, but he could no longer hear them. He could only hear the sweet, whispering chords. He had never heard a voice so beautiful. The voice of a siren. The voice of a goddess. "I'm listening," he thought. A huge, huge thank you to all of my poltergeists. Bobby Tripp, Calderon, Cheryl Meredith, Gary, and Spirit Father. I'd also like to thank one of my new apparitions this week, Barbie_JL. As always, your support is so appreciated, and thank you from the very bottom of my heart.